I think I didn't appreciate how big football is in the Northeast. It's another level that I just didn't have the appreciation for. And the passion there for football is incredible. How do we want to play as a football club? That is our central tenet of our club, and everything will branch off of that. That's ultimately what my skill set is now and was developed over that time. So I'm kind of a translator, might be a way of looking at it. And I said earlier how often you go into an organization, there'd be today data here, there, and there everywhere. In the case of Sunderland, there really was no data. You spend a lot of time and effort designing these processes, designing what you want to achieve, designing what your goals and outcomes are. Don't throw them away at the first sign of something not going well. The time gap between a problem arising or a question being asked and an answer being given or a intervention being made, the bigger that gap, the less impactful and less effective it is. By all means, iterate and develop and tweak, but don't throw it out the window just because things aren't going so well. So I think that was a real testament to how the club behaved. And truth be told, actually, I think when we got into the playoffs, we were hugely confident.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast, and today's guest is James Young. So James is currently Head of Sports Partnerships at data and technology company Genius Sports, and before that he was recruited by Sunderland AFC to set up and lead their new data analytics department. So James has a very impressive and also diverse CV in terms of some other previous roles that he's had throughout his career so far. So James started with a degree in mechanical engineering. He spent time working in biomechanics. He pivoted a little bit into the publishing world and spent many years at Deloitte. So at Deloitte, he headed up their performance analytics division, and that's where he joined Sunderland from. So as a Sunderland fan, I was really interested to speak to James about joining the club, what he did initially to set up that department, and what the whole experience was like. So before we get into the conversation, I want to quickly ask you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done so. If you find value and enjoy this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. So without further ado, let's bring in James Young. James, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Very well, mate. Thank you. Thanks for having me along.
Yeah, no, looking forward to chatting. So you have somewhat of a impressive but also diverse CV in terms of the different roles that you've done. So in this conversation, I'm hoping to kind of dig into some of them different roles, how you've kind of navigated throughout one to the other, and also maybe some of the skills you've learned along the way. For those that I kind of have watched this channel before, probably will know that I am a Sunderland fan, so I might have a bit of a bias towards your time at Sunderland, James. So there'll be probably a bit more questions around that section, but we will get to that eventually. So I'm going to pass it over to you first, James. So for those that don't know who you are, if you just want to give yourself a quick intro and a bit of an overview.
Yeah, sure thing. So, yeah, I'm James, the head of sports partnerships at Genius Sports, a role that I've just started actually in the last couple of months. But my career in sport has been over about the last 15 years now. As you alluded to at the start, I've taken some interesting twists and turns along the way. And obviously, I've always had my eyes on the direction I want to go in. Sometimes you can't take that path in a straight line. You have to take some twists and turns. So, yeah, really interested to talk about those twists and turns and what that's entailed over the years and where my passions lie and what I'm trying to achieve within sport.
Yeah, definitely. So let's just start with your degree, because again, that is definitely a non-sporting background, and all the guests that I've had on this channel also similar. They come from these weird and wonderful things, and I think it's good for people to see that someone can achieve a career in sport and they can get to these kind of roles without going the traditional sports degree, internship, etc. So your degree was in mechanical engineering.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So why that? And this is what I love about sport, the fact that if you think back to the first lecture of your mechanical engineering degree, you probably didn't have a clue that where you would kind of go from there, unless you did want to work in sport at that point. I don't know.
Yeah, so I did. I did.
Okay.
Is the short answer. So I actually wanted to do a degree at Loughborough called sports technology.
Hmm.
I'm assuming that that degree still exists today, but at the time, I think that was a BSc, and my dad was quite traditional, and he was like, I don't want you with a science degree. I want you with an engineering degree. And I was like, okay, well, fine, I'll do engineering.
Yeah.
And mechanical was the kind of closest place I could get to. But within that, I always had half an eye on a sports focus. And in actual fact, in my final year, I more or less begged my professors to do a sports focused degree. So
Hmm.
I worked with wheelchair rugby for about 6 months or so, working on my kind of final dissertation on my engineering degree. My first kind of exposure with working in sport, and or murderball actually is a term you've probably heard. If you haven't seen the film, it's sensational. But yeah, had always had a half an eye. I knew I was doing the engineering degree, but any excuse I could find to do something that was sport related, and obviously being at Loughborough, that wasn't awfully difficult. I seized that with both hands.
Yeah. And was it just sport in general? Because obviously football is where you've spent time at Sunderland. Was it mainly football? Is football your main sport, or because you've done
Yeah,
cricket as well, didn't you? You worked in a bit of cricket with the biomechanics.
yeah, I've done a lot of everything. So yeah, I'm probably a rugby guy at heart. That's what I played. That's where my talent lie. I was a serviceable footballer, but never the greatest. But love football like many guys do. Had a strong bond with my dad through kind of going to the Emirates. That was or Highbury really when I first started doing it. That was where my love of football started as a young boy, and obviously being at Loughborough, the ECB, the England cricket team, are based there. So you've got great access to them, and many top athletes come and go all the time. The England rugby team were there for a while, but getting exposure to the England cricket team was probably where my sports career really took a leap forward. Because I did, after I'd done my engineering degree, I wanted to do something more sports focused. So stepped into sports biomechanics, and as part of that degree, had a final thesis to deliver that was working in an applied sports setting. And we had the England cricket team on our doorstep. It was actually just, I think I'm getting the dates right here. It was just pre-Ashes, so I'm showing my age a bit here. It was 2009, I think that was. And we had the opportunity to work with that England squad. And for those who have got long memories, the likes of Graham Swan. I was working with the spin bowlers actually specifically, but Graham Swan, Monty Panesar, and that's where I got time to spend with those athletes and realised that I actually didn't want to work on sports technology as I originally thought. I wanted to work on human performance. The analytics bit came sort of during that degree, but I knew that I wanted to work with the athletes. I knew that was where the biggest opportunity was to make strides forward, and I knew I could add value. So that was a space that I absolutely love doing, and as soon as I'd started working with those guys, I knew that's what I wanted to commit the rest of my career towards.
Yeah, so you did, and then there was a master's in sports biomechanics, was it? In terms of the mechanical engineering degree, Jim, is that, I know nothing about that by the way, but is that is that heavy on data? Like, is that
Pretty heavy. It's it's your maths, your physics, that kind of thing. Truth be told, I wasn't particularly good at it. Maybe because the true passion wasn't there, and I was going through the motions a bit. I certainly enjoyed my time at university as well, and maybe didn't quite get the proportion of time spent on the academics with the sports side and the social side as well. But it was super interesting. It gave me a lot of foundational skills. I think mechanical engineering of all the engineering disciplines is probably that kind of multi-tool kit that you can use across many different disciplines. So I learned an awful lot, and actually, truth be told, the biggest part of what I learned on that engineering degree was a year's placement that I did. So as part of the degree, you had an option to do a year in industry, and I went and worked in healthcare manufacturing in a company called 3M, who are a massive company, by the way, absolutely massive, but almost no one's heard of them. They make post-it notes, which is probably the thing everyone will know, or the original post-it notes at least. And they're a really fascinating company. And at the heart of what they do is around efficiency, something called Lean Six Sigma. I'm getting sort of deep into kind of business terminology already, but it's about trying to do everything you do in the most efficient, effective way possible, essentially. And that really instilled some good fundamentals at me from an early stage. Anyone that's worked with me know I'm quite obsessed with efficiency. Maybe it's something we'll come to later, but that year in industry was absolutely invaluable for me. It wasn't in sport, obviously. I would have loved for it to have been in sport. But at that time, it was very challenging, particularly if you weren't doing a sports degree to score yourself a sports placement. But again, I just soaked up the experience with it in the back of my mind, what I wanted to achieve, and took all the learnings that I thought were relevant to that from there, and many things that I didn't expect to learn as well. But yeah, absolutely loved it, learned a ton, and in many ways was the most valuable part of my undergraduate degree.
Yeah, perfect. So, just for those listening, James, can you give a quick overview of what the role of what biomechanics is basically? I know some people like myself will have probably done like maybe a module in their sports degree, and that's basically as far as their knowledge goes. So, can you just build on that a little bit? What the role of the biomechanist, is that right? So, what they do
Yeah, yeah.
working with athletes?
Well, yeah, look, in short, it's how an athlete, a body moves and how it can move, where its limitations are, where its strengths are, where there's room for improvement. I'm being super generalist here. And actually, I hold my hands up and say, since doing that degree, I've barely done any work in the biomechanical space. Only a couple of times have I got to touch on it. Um, and again taught me a lot of really important fundamental skills, and particularly I mentioned my kind of love for analysis kind of grew from that. There was a heavy on the data. So to give you an example of my project, I mentioned I was working with the England cricket team. I was looking at spin bowlers, specifically wrist spin bowlers, and the mechanical parts of their movement, so the parts of their body that moved and how that imparted that force on the ball when it was leaving their hand. And the way that we do that is essentially put tiny little markers. You've probably seen it in promotional videos for FIFA and things like that. They put the little ball markers all over them. They wear kind of almost like a wetsuit, and then they perform the action. And we did this with the England cricket team. We did it all the way down to youngsters. I think 14 or 15 were the youngest, to look at how that evolved and grew. But with those little markers, we're then looking at a really high frame rate, so about 100 frames a second, how those markers are moving through 3D space. Once we have that information, we can then start to put some pretty simple equations on top of it to understand speed of movement, rotational force, things like that, and then understand what parts of the body are having a material impact on the spin of the ball. Now, whether the spin relates to a good delivery or not, if you're a cricket fan, is another question entirely for another day. But that's the kind of pure biomechanical view on it. Like, how can the body impart this immense force on the ball? So obviously you can apply that in any sport, in any different skill. We were just looking, or I was just looking at that one particular one. I had other guys on the course who were actually looking at the kind of the opposite direction of spin, the off spin, and how that was imparting force on the ball, because it's an entirely different mechanical movement. And actually, the work that's gone on at Loughborough for many years before I started and many years after is heavily involved around cricket, and the forces that are applied onto the body when they're performing those skills, those actions.
Yeah, definitely. So that's your kind of stint as a biomechanist. You mentioned you did work with cricket. You've got some work with the UK Athletics as well. But then I want to kind of just touch on, because there's a role in between them and then obviously kind of moving into more of the football analysis again. That's kind of seems a bit out there and different. So that's in publishing, I believe. So if you want to kind of expand on why that came about, James, why did you do that, and what maybe you learned from that particular role?
Yeah, it probably seems weird to many people, and certainly it wasn't what I had planned for my career. But if you kind of paint the picture of leaving university around the time of the financial crisis, actually it was very widely publicised at the time that there weren't any paid jobs for interns in football, and it was just something that I couldn't afford to do. I had some offers of unpaid roles, but couldn't take it. So I started to look around. What can I get that can kind of tie me over, and I'll find a way back onto the track that I want to be on. And but more coincidence than anything else, really. I had a friend that worked in recruitment, and they worked with this publishing company that were looking for someone to support digital books. So digital books, ebooks, it might sound kind of ridiculous to say today, but they were just becoming a thing at the time. And actually, my first day on the job, we sold our first ever ebook. So massive publishing company, one of the big four publishing companies in the world. Very few people have heard of the name, but they're called Hachette. And this was a new realm, but publishing is quite an antiquated business. It's quite old school. It's been around a lot longer than sports technology and things like that have. And as a guy that had a bit of a technological background and was pretty tech savvy, I was a bit of a unicorn in the world of publishing, to be honest. So I got thrust into probably a more advanced role than I would have otherwise been in any other industry, and asked to kind of look after the digital business essentially, and make sure that ran smoothly. So we went, in the 5 years that I was there, started with that one ebook on the first day, and by the time I left, we're selling tens of thousands of ebooks for millions of pounds every month or year. So it was, but again, I spent the whole time knowing what I wanted to do, knowing that I was going to leave at some point, but trying to pick up all the skills. And as I said, I probably got to experience things that I wouldn't have done if I'd taken an entry level role anywhere else. So I got to work really closely with the big ebook sellers like Apple and Google and Amazon, and had involvement in the contract negotiation processes and the pricing structures and how the information was communicated, which is a really key one that really helped me in my analyst career. And yeah, just got a lot of great exposure to things I otherwise wouldn't have, and really tried to leap on that opportunity to learn. And um, did that for a couple of years, about 3, 4 years before I started to go, okay, I think I've learned everything I can here that is transferable. Now let's find a way of plotting a path back to where I want to be.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's really important because I think we said maybe before we started recording, James, that people, some analysts probably don't consider these other types of roles that, or at least see how these other types of roles can be useful in their career. And like you said, it's never normally a straight path from where you start to where you want to go. It's kind of going, and like I said, you always had your eye on getting back into it and just kind of plotting the time and making the most of the opportunity you had there to better yourself in the next kind of opportunity. So yeah, really, really interesting. And then I think from there, then James, I think the next one listed on your LinkedIn is kind of the first kind of introduction to football, really, football analysis in terms of the time with Stats Perform. So that what was that job? What was that job, James? Was that kind of data collection in terms of were you going out to stadiums? Were you just paint a picture of what that looked like?
Okay, so I hope you're enjoying the video so far, but I have a really quick interruption for anybody with an interest in video analysis. So if that's you, please do click the link down below the video for In Play Online. So just to give a quick overview, because I think it'll be relevant to a lot of people that are watching this particular video. So In Play Online is a cloud-based video analysis software. So it allows you to tag your videos, and when you've done your tagging, that includes adding labels, adding comments, adding notes and voice notes even, and you can even illustrate and draw over your clip. So if you are an aspiring analyst looking for your job and you want to create a portfolio of work, if you're a scout looking to make your kind of reports a little bit better and more animated, if you're a coach looking to get into analysis a little bit more, then this tool will be great for you because it starts at just £15 a month. So once you've done your analysis, you can add all the clips to different playlists, which can be downloaded and exported offline. You can put them into presentations and also share them to different people within your team. So it comes with a whole bunch of other features, but I'll let you click the link down below if you are interested. As I say, packages start at just £15 a month, so it's a very affordable solution if you are looking for something to help with your video analysis. So that's it for the interruption. Let's get back to the video.
Yeah, so as I said, I knew that I wanted to get back into football, and I was looking for part-time roles to help me transition back, essentially. So I did my 9 to 5 at the publishing company during the week, and then on Friday night, at the time they were based just outside Waterloo, I'd head down to the Opta offices and cover the Friday night games, do that Saturday, Sunday, and actually Monday night as well, and then back to the day job in the week. So at Opta, I applied for an analyst role, so the data collection, essentially, watching the games and logging everything that was happening. It's an incredible skill. It really is an incredible skill, and I encourage anyone to sort of do their research. There's a few videos out there of how that's done, but it's incredibly challenging as well. And there's a pretty well structured course that, at the time, at least when it was based in the UK, it's now moved into Portugal, I believe. At the time, there was a very well structured process that you went through, and a kind of almost qualification you achieved to be able to do that to a decent standard. And I went through that process, and truthfully told, I wasn't great at it. And what I did quickly discover is doing a day job and then trying to have the sort of a mental sharpness to do that was a bit too much for me. So I went through that process, but then actually took the kind of level below, which was a more generalized collection of key events across games across Europe. So I'd watch sort of 5, 6 games at the same time and log key stuff. And there was actually a level below that, which was even more general, just scores, really, just scores across the whole of Europe. So I can't even remember now, it's a long, long time ago, but, 20, 30 odd leagues where I'd keep up to date on the scores and just make sure I was logging them in real time. And yeah, sit and do that for a long old shift on a Saturday and a Sunday, and sort of, change my outfit and then go into my other job. But like I say, it was all about plotting myself on a path that I wanted to return to and be in sport full time. I met some incredible people at Stats. I loved it. It was a wonderful place to work. It was perfect for me at that time, and many of those guys are still there. I learned a lot from them. Quite frankly, I'm still learning from them now. I still hit them up now and again to catch up. So yeah, it was a great time. It was a great learning experience for me, particularly on the skill set of an analyst. That was not something I'd really had exposure to. I'd obviously done the biomechanics stuff that we talked about, but didn't really know what it meant to be an analyst at that point in time. So, learned a hell of a lot and did that for around about a year before I found my way into a much more sports focused role.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because there's quite a few previous guests of this podcast that have all had somewhat of a stint at Opta or Stats Perform, so they've all kind of done that and learned, like you say, the processes that kind of go into that. So moving on from there, then you joined Deloitte. So again, this is kind of a company that I think a lot of people might have heard of, but they don't really know much about what they actually do. It's a huge company. I just kind of know it as a consultancy firm or something. So, and even the word consultancy can sometimes seem a bit, what actually do they do? I didn't actually know that they had, because I'm just going from your profile here, James. So you led the performance analytics practice, a division which specialises in helping sports teams and organisations kind of use data effectively. I didn't know that existed at Deloitte. So can you go a little bit into that, how that job came about as well, and what you kind of got up to in that role?
Yeah, so if we start with what Deloitte are, so they're a management consultancy. They're a huge multinational company, massive, one of the biggest in the world. And to maybe put it in the simplest terms, what that really means is there's a bunch of specialists in a bunch of different areas that can support businesses on a short-term basis. It might be a really long-term basis in some cases, but more typically a short-term basis. That might be in different industries like finance. That might be in different areas like audit or something like that. That's probably what they're best known for, to be honest, is audit, which not my cup of tea, not really what I'm interested in. But they just so happen to have an area. An analytics specialism. And to that point, they'd done an awful lot of work in finance, an awful lot of work in media, telco. And there was a partner there. So the way the business is made up is lots of partners who kind of all run their own little mini businesses under the bigger umbrella. And there was a partner there who was incredibly successful in telco and analytics in telco, but was a big sports fan and had always wanted to apply what he'd done in that telco space, and was looking for someone with sporting experience, sporting exposure to help build that out with. So myself and a couple of others, it was a small group, only really 4 of us to begin with, including that partner, to build out this practice that took all those advanced analytical processes and workflows and apply that into specifically a sporting performance environment. So Deloitte has quite a famous sports business group that focus on the business of sport. We weren't really interested in the business. We were interested in the performance of sport and human performance. So, and I was incredibly fortunate, a really, really top guy, who actually just a couple of weeks ago has retired from consulting now, but he, we had about a 15-minute conversation. It was very relaxed. He's like, this is what we want to do. You've got some skills that I think align to this. Let's go on this journey together. And it was a great time. Really, really interesting clients. Probably one of the huge benefits of Deloitte is we could be quite selective and pick really prestigious, high-performing teams to work with. So we weren't playing a numbers game here where we were trying to work with every club under the sun. We were trying to work with the best of the best, really. And actually, to go back to my initial comment about being passionate and starting in rugby, that's where we started at Deloitte as well. So for those of you with long memories, we started with Saracens in their early days, and a team that had been really good and had huge aspirations for a long time, but never quite converted that into greatness. And we were part of that. I'll never stand here and claim that we were solely responsible. There were many people at work for it, but part of that collective that helped them really take that step up from being good into great. And actually, in Saracens' case, dominant, really dominant, like winning the national competition and winning the European competition. And they're still a force to be reckoned with, 10 or so years later.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so you mentioned rugby there. You've kind of also worked with the likes of kind of the FA, UEFA, Premier League, and kind of different governing bodies across different sports. One thing that is linked on your profile, James, I wanted to actually, I don't know how much you can kind of say about this, but it was a specific project on kind of the FA and overseas players in terms of after Brexit and the GBE rules and stuff like that. So Where did Deloitte come into that in terms of what did that look like? And can you just explain maybe what the whole thing was for in terms of GBE in general, because people might not know what that exactly is?
Yeah, so truth be told, at the time, maybe we didn't fully know what it was going to become. I think whenever there's a big policy change or a big change in regulations, it kind of all really begins with research and understanding. So this was kind of before Brexit happened and before anything like that. And we were trying to understand a number of different things. There was actually a range of different projects we were doing, sort of mini micro projects, I guess, to understand better about the composition of the international setup, the squads, what had brought success for other countries over the years. You know, there's been great dominant sides from Germany and Spain in recent times, and how did they accomplish that? That was kind of what the question was. You know, was that through homegrown players? Was that through loaning young players? You know, how did they achieve what they achieved, and do it over an extended period? So, you know, I obviously can't say the specifics of exactly what that was, but that was broadly what we were looking at. And ultimately, what the research turned into, or some of the research turned into, was the GBE requirements that people might be familiar with, which is essentially post Brexit. What are the visa requirements for a player to come and play in this country? What do they have to have achieved? And there's a few different criteria. I'm no specialist on this. It's quite a complex area nowadays, and it's evolved a lot since its first iteration. But essentially, you've had enough senior minutes, or you have the potential to become a high quality senior player. And it kind of made sure that it was you know, the leagues in the UK were importing high quality talent. So, you know, it wasn't every part of the requirements that were created there for GBE, but it played a role in what ultimately became those regulations, probably 3 or 4 years down the line. So yeah, really fascinating topic. Very data science focused. We had a team of data scientists that did some quite sensational work. Actually, interestingly, I had a relationship at the FA with their lead kind of data architect there from my time working with him at Swansea. An incredibly talented guy, one of the best in the business, in my opinion, Alex Thomas, who's still there, as I understand. And that really helped accelerate things, because often when you're doing a data project, you have to sift through a ton of really messy, ugly data. There's things in spreadsheets, on notepads, on whiteboards, you know, it's all over the shop. Whereas the FA had already put some hard yards in to get that into a nice structured format that people could start asking questions of the data rather than having to spend a lot of time cleaning it up first. So, you know, I guess we're starting to move on to data analysis a bit more already, and I don't want to jump the gun, but broadly speaking, that's what the project was, and it was a great time and a really fascinating project.
Yeah. So you were at Deloitte 6 years. So just going back to kind of learning different skill sets and stuff like that, James, what would you say kind of you pulled from the 6 years there that maybe set you instead to get the role at Sunderland afterwards, in terms of those skills and working with the different people you're working with?
Oh, a hell of a lot. So I learned a lot of data skills. I will say, I guess, you know, it's a good time to say, I don't really consider myself to be a data specialist in any one particular area, and we can talk about what I mean by that in a second. But I would consider myself more of a data generalist. I have a good understanding of over all aspects of data. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not super technical in that space, but I have a good understanding of what data scientists do, and that's ultimately what my skill set is now and was developed over that time. So I'm kind of a translator, might be a way of looking at it. I can take kind of the complex problems, the complex issues, be that in how data is stored and managed, how data is analyzed, or how data is presented, and turn that into a message that is understandable for someone that wouldn't understand all the technical detail. You know, a coach or someone in the recruitment department, they might know bits and pieces, but they need it laid out for them in a way that they can really understand those complex findings in a simple way. And I say it to a lot of analysts, and I guess it's a little tongue in cheek, but when you're explaining what you do and what you've found, think about it as though you're explaining it to, your 8-year-old niece or something. How can you boil that concept down to its simplest possible form? And that was something that I really refined at Deloitte. That is the skill set you have to have as a management consultant, is getting your message across, because you could do some wonderful analysis, the best analysis that's ever been done, let's say, but if you can't communicate that, then it's kind of worthless to anyone. So that was something I really, really refined there, and I did that. I actually worked on many other things as well at Deloitte. It wasn't just sport 100%. I probably spent 30-40% of my time on other things. And again, always trying to draw from those other experiences and how I could apply them into the sports space. But the core kind of fundamental skill set, I think, was how to take a complex concept and try and boil it down into something that's easy to understand, and continue to work at that every single day.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll kind of get to Sunderland then, James. So as I mentioned, Sunderland fan, I remember seeing the job advertised in terms of head of data, and then there was also a data scientist or analyst advertised similar, same sort of time. And I'm thinking, okay, this is quite exciting. Like, Sunderland are kind of going, at the time, League One. You joined sort of at the end. I think you joined at the end when we lost in the playoffs, I believe.
Yeah, about midway through the next season, yeah.
Yeah. So you've joined Sunderland, and kind of, you mentioned that kind of importance of translating to maybe non-data personnel, because you're kind of going into a club here which doesn't really, at least from what I could tell, doesn't really have a data department. So what was that like, James, in terms of the process of kind of, because I suppose you've got to pick your environment as well. Like, you're going into there, you've got to probably maximize that you can make an impact at that particular club. So what was your thought process about the job when you seen the job come up? And you're thinking, okay, this is my ticket into a club, this is my next step now. Just your thought process around that time, if you can.
Yeah, so maybe to rewind maybe a couple of years just before that. So I had spent, I think it was actually 8 years I was at Deloitte. I don't mean to correct you there, Chris, but it was a long time. And I'd worked with about a dozen different clubs and teams and governing bodies and whatnot. And I made sure I'd learned something at every single one of those. So, we worked with Olympic teams that achieved medals in the Olympic Games. We worked with the rugby team, so we mentioned pro cycling. But it didn't matter what the sport was. I always wanted to come out of that experience having learned something from how they operate, because football can be a bit myopic. It can be a bit blinkered in its view. And I thought my strength was going to be able to bring those learnings from outside and try and apply them in the football space. So, it was a weird time around, I think it was 2021. I joined Sunderland, right in the middle of COVID. All the sports work that I was doing is basically ground to a halt, and I was working on a COVID related project. And then, yes, the opportunity popped up, and I'd been keeping my ear to the ground and seeing what opportunities might arise. And that was my pitch, So for those that haven't seen, this is kind of more or less straight after the Sunderland documentary, which I highly recommend everyone watches. It's great, great TV. But a tricky time for the club, we're not in the place that I think a club of that size and stature and history should be. So new owner had come in, really young guy, had a lot of very progressive ideas, and infusing data into the decision-making processes was something that he was really passionate about and wanted to drive. So that's how the role came about. And the conversation, like I say, was kind of largely, as I've described there, about taking all these learnings from different places and applying it into the club. Now, the club didn't have anything from a data standpoint, didn't even have a structured analysis department. So in actual fact, my responsibility there and the role that was being advertised was to oversee the traditional video analysts, as well as a data analyst that was being advertised for, and combine those into one kind of cohesive unit, but starting from scratch. And I said earlier how often you go into an organisation, there'd be, data here, there, and there, everywhere. In the case of Sunderland, there really was no data. There was some little scraps dotted around, but in a very traditional sense, it was largely a blank slate. And certainly the processes weren't in existence and weren't well established. And yeah, it needed to be built from the ground up. You mentioned the role that was being advertised as well. That was something that was really, really critically important for me, is to have someone that I knew could do what we needed to get done there. And with the budgets that are available at a League One club, get it. And we'll talk about this a bit later on, I think, about what you need to look to put in place at a club. But I knew that we needed someone that was multifaceted and had a number of skills. And I actually went back to Deloitte and reached out. We interviewed a few people, and one of those people was someone I'd reached out to at Deloitte who I'd never worked with, but I'd heard about as someone that was very talented. Um, but like me, had a passion to work in sport and was waiting for that opportunity to arise, and that was a role we filled very quickly after my own.
Okay, so if you've made it this far into the video, you must be enjoying the content. Either that or you have simply fallen asleep. So whichever one of them it is, you probably won't mind me asking you for a quick favour. So as you know, I'm always looking to grow the channel. So the bigger the channel gets, the more people we can reach and impact, but also the bigger and better guests we can invite on to the channel to have these types of chats. So with that in mind, if you haven't already done so, I would very much appreciate it if you did hit the subscribe button down below the video. The stats are showing around 25% of viewers are subscribed. So there's a big chunk of you that are watching the videos, but you haven't yet hit the subscribe button, but I will let you off because you can do it right now. It's free and it literally takes 1 second. So if you go down, click the subscribe button, it would mean a lot to the channel and help the channel to grow. So that's all for now. Let's get back to the video.
Yeah. So in terms of that kind of the process of, like, say, the interview and stuff, James, are you speaking with the owner at that point? Is it Christian speaking was the director of football? Like, what did the whole process? Who were you kind of conversing with to when you first went in?
So I was one of the first joiners under the new ownership. So never met with Kyril until a few stages down the line. So the process very much was driven by Christian and Steve Davison, who's recently actually left the club. But those were the two guys who were driving the conversation. Steve comes from an engineering background, like myself, actually, so has a very similar mindset to me. So Christian kind of probed me on the footballing side and where my strengths were, where my weaknesses were, and Steve probed me on the kind of more data analytical side, where my strengths and weaknesses were. And, that was a process of 3 or 4 interviews, something like that, including a visit up to the club. I think even actually a couple of visits up to the club, all in the midst of COVID and lockdown as well. So kind of a bit surreal to be taking a train on your own up to the northeast. But yeah, was a pretty rigorous process. I think one of Christian's great skills is the ability to identify talent and probe it. I know that's a bit of a humble brag there by saying that, but I think he's a really interesting and challenging character in an interview process, and kept me honest. And I like to think that if I could answer those questions well that he gave me, I'd be in a really good place to succeed at the club.
So I mean, you mentioned obviously the lack of department or anything when you first joined. So where do you start in a position like that, James? Like what do you do in the first 6 months in the role to plan? Because you mentioned you kind of joined midway through, so you almost had like the back end of that season to get ready for the next one. So what were you thinking and doing at that time?
Yeah, exactly right. So I used that back end of the season really to get on the phone an awful lot, get on the phone and do my market research about what I was going to do in-house, what I was going to bring in from outside. Truth be told, even the budgeting structure at the club was pretty minimal at the time. So even fundamentals like that had to be established as to what a budget would be, where the money would get spent, and how. What the requirements of the club were, what the requirements of the head coach would be, and of the recruitment department. And actually, it's probably worth me explaining really what the role was designed to do. So. In kind of maybe more business speak, I had a vertical of the video analyst, so a department that I managed, and that was a dedicated department. The data department was more of a horizontal that cut across the whole club. So every aspect of performance, I was involved in the kind of data processes, whereas the video analyst was much more, they did their more traditional job of delivering to the teams and the coaches they worked with, and combining those two together. So we had this kind of T-shaped model almost. And yeah, so what the idea first and foremost was me understand, what this was going to be, what this was going to look like. Obviously, in the interview process, they're gathering information about me. I'm also trying to gather information about what this job really is. There's only so much you can get on a one side of A4 with a job description. So, you have to fill in some of the blanks that exist there, and had that opportunity. And then step 2 was actually the club was going through a process of physically moving people around the building and restructuring the actual building itself. And step two was actually getting us in a room together. So all the analysts, as I say, there was no analysis department. So they were all kind of scattered around. The academy analysts sat in what was actually formerly a kitchen. I was sat in what I politely referred to as a dungeon downstairs with the first team analysts. And we were all scattered around the building, which was challenging. And it's hard to form a cohesive team like that. So the next step after really understanding what we wanted to do, what the scope of the challenge ahead of us was getting us all in a room together. And the club did a wonderful refurb of the building. We had beautiful kind of new, very modern glass offices and all that in what is an incredible academy, by the way, probably one of the best in the country. And getting us all in one place with the relevant hardware in terms of laptops, trying to improve some of the hardware in terms of cameras. One of the big projects I did early on was actually just sort of digitally enabling the whole club a bit more. So there was a lot of old school desktop computers knocking around, and I'm kind of sitting there going, well, you guys are out on the road for half the year. What are you doing? You're packing up this big old desktop computer and plugging it in wherever you're going. And it just wasn't practical. So we did a big hardware move to, high powered laptops and iPads and so on to try and better enable people to do their job in a more mobile way. The other big piece we did as well around that building was getting more digital media, so TV screens essentially around with AirPlay and things like that. So you've got your laptop. I want to share something with a group of people. Boom! I'm kind of AirPlaying on that screen. So our little analyst office, and we had some analyst booths and some breakout areas and things like that. It was all very digitally enabled to allow us to share the research and knowledge and analytical work that we've done as easily as possible with large groups of players. So that was kind of step two, and then step three was kind of bringing it all together, I guess, like trying to establish the processes better. Something that I should really say is that there were some really talented people already in that building. I think the academy analysts that I worked with were sensational, particularly with the kind of support from a kind of technical and resource side. The things that they were accomplishing was pretty unbelievable, and we wanted to really harness that and maximize that and grow that and nurture these guys to be able to deliver even more that they were doing, or at least allow them. I mentioned that efficiency thing earlier, at least allow them to deliver things they were doing in a less laborious way. And then likewise, the first team analysts that we had when I first joined, still there, one of those guys, just picked his brain, really learned he'd been at the club for a long time before I joined. What's this club about? How does it operate? What do people like and dislike? I mean, he'd seen, God knows, 8-9 head coaches in his time. So, he knew how to pivot and change the way of working and really try to extract all that knowledge from him so that we could try and start to structure that in a more formalized way and try and make that a more efficient process for him. So rather than him being up all night viewing clips in a very manual way, he could, maybe extract the same information in a more automated way that, gave him a bit more time with his family and his kids. So, there's obviously a ton of detail that sits underneath that. I've really just skimmed across the surface, and I've barely even mentioned the other departments like recruitment, like sports science and medicine, even operations and administration. We were heavily involved in what they were doing as well. So hell of a lot more detail to be had there, but hopefully that paints a picture of what that looked like at that time at that club.
Yeah, you mentioned, so I'm presuming you're referring to Mark. I think he's been there. He's probably been there as long as the stadium at this point, hasn't he? Their agent. So perfect. So yeah, that's really good insight. I mean, what did you kind of know about the club before, James? You mentioned you're kind of a sports fan anyway. Like at that time, obviously after the Netflix documentary, we're in League One. Probably we don't obviously want to be in League One. We're a big club. We want to be back in the Premier League, the Championship. So luckily we got up throughout the playoffs the season after. But what was the feeling around the club at that point in terms of, that kind of, we're a big club, but this is where we are, but we don't want to be here kind of thing?
Yeah, a few things. I mean, obviously I knew about the club from the Premier League days, knew that they were a massive club. I think I didn't appreciate how big football is in the Northeast. I always thought, I'm a football fan. I go to, the Emirates Stadium and there's 60,000 people in there. That's a big club. But it's another level. It's another level that I just didn't have the appreciation for, and the passion there for football is incredible. The city, in many ways is driven by that football club. If the team win, the city's on a high. If the team lose, the city's on a low. So I hadn't experienced something like that, and it was incredible to witness. Really, I think the other thing that I knew about the club and why I was so interested in Kyril taking over was that it was just a huge club with an awful lot of potential, and a lot of the pieces were already in place. So, many clubs nowadays are restricted a bit by old creaky stadiums and the ability to get fans in to watch games. The club had addressed that. The Stadium of Light had been there since around about the start of the decade, start of the century, and yeah, that was huge. I've already mentioned that the academy is one of the best in the country. So it's a brilliant facility, and so Bob Murray, who put a lot of these things in place, was a real visionary. He had great vision to see what the club was going to need in the long term, and it took some incredible steps. Not to mention all the community development projects he's done as well, in and around the football club, the charities, the sports centres, and everything else, and. Yeah, I think it was he really laid strong foundations to build upon, and I think that's what I saw most in the club, that there were really strong foundations in place. It was they just got lost their way a bit, but all the key things were really there and ready to go. And if you look at some of those things that he put in place back in the early noughties and how much that stadium cost, I don't know what the figure is, but I know that it's a snip on what it would cost you to make a stadium these days. So, we knew there weren't big expenditures that need to be made on big projects that were going to hinder other things. It was like we could just purely focus on investing in the performance space. And actually, a lot of the things were, relatively low hanging fruit, didn't cost money. It was about just putting structure and rigor around the process at the football club. And, we talked about some of the things I did there, but probably one of the big parts I played was around being part of that senior leadership team that developed rigorous processes around the academy, around recruitment, around training, around operations, to just tighten things up, really. That's not to say they were being done poorly before, but I'm always a believer that things can be done better, regardless. Even if you're best at what you do, you can always do something better. So that process improvement and putting rigor around the process was something that I was heavily involved in, and something that Christian really drove strongly as well.
Yeah, definitely. While we're on the topic of the day at Wembley against Wycombe was, I'm sure you enjoyed the day as well, but it was just such an amazing day. Like you mentioned, kind of the emotion and stuff like that. Like it just felt obviously great to win at Wembley anyway, but like to finally get out of League One and be like, right, now we can kind of crack on and kind of push on to the next level, which is where we all want to be. So yeah, thanks for all the work you did there, James. That was much appreciated.
Well, it was look, I'll say a few things about that. One is that, to the credit of the owner and the sporting director, it was never something that was pushed as had to happen. I think too many clubs set themselves a target, which only 3 clubs can achieve that in a season, right? So you don't want to overly pressure people to try and accomplish that. Now, look, everyone wanted to. There was no one in that building going, I'm not bothered if we don't get promoted. Everyone wanted to achieve that, and that was what we wanted to do, but the pressure wasn't applied. So it's a very subtle difference there. And obviously the club had tried and failed on a number of occasions to get out of League One. It's very, very tough league to get out of, very tough league to get out of. And, that was a culmination of a lot of hard work that went in, and changes to the playing style, changes to the recruitment strategy, changes to how the team prepared, really top to bottom, everything about how the club was operating changed, and to see it all come together. And there were certainly times where we were looking a bit out of it. It was looking like, are we going to make the playoffs? We started well, we had a bad run, we recovered it right at the death, and managed to drag ourselves into the playoffs. So it's tough to kind of keep the faith, and when things are not going the way you'd hope. But one of the messages I'd really say, and one of the learnings I took away, was that you spend a lot of time and effort designing these processes, designing what you want to achieve, designing what your goals and outcomes are. Don't throw them away at the first sign of something not going well. Stick by it. There's a process you come up with on the back of a fag packet after a bad loss in half an hour is not going to be better than the process you spent the whole summer preparing for. By all means, iterate and develop and tweak, but don't throw it out the window just because things aren't going so well. So I think that was a real testament to how the club behaved. And truth be told, actually, I think when we got into the playoffs, we were hugely confident, hugely confident. I think we thought if we can get through that semi, then Wycombe are ours for the taking. And it's a really unique situation, the playoff final, because you've got extra time to prepare. You're so used to working on a 3-day period of preparation for double game weeks. All of a sudden, you've got 10 days or so. So it's almost too much time. You kind of go, I want more. I want to do more. I want to make sure I've uncovered every stone. But what more can I do at this point? And it was great. And Alex Neil was there at that time, and Alex listened to some of the analysis we did, and that fed into the game plan, and ultimately had some impact on the outcome of that final. And it was an incredible day. The sun's out. Just what felt like a million Sunderland fans had just taken over London, and it was sensational. Yeah, absolutely incredible day, incredible experience, and wonderful for the club to kind of get that monkey off their back and get back closer to the ultimate goal of the Premier League.
Yeah, definitely. Did you, when you went in then, James, with you mentioned the other chap from Deloitte was Kyril, is it? So did you?
That's right. Yeah.
Was there any kind of pushback or any resistance from any existing staff? It sounds like there wasn't, but in terms of from the outside, you two going in, or I know you've worked in sport before that, but you're not really traditional football people, are you? So were you seen any different in terms of getting your message across, or was everyone just kind of aligning on board, I suppose, coming down from the owner's guidance?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'll certainly say there wasn't resistance. Definitely wasn't resistance at all. Equally, I wouldn't say people were jumping for joy and jumping at the thought of it. So, it was somewhere in between. And if you really look at what the club had done over the last sort of 6-7 years or so, things had not been going well, gradually slipping down the league. And, as I mentioned, for a club that the city is so interwoven with, that's really tough. You're in this bubble of things are not where we want them to be. So, and I think there still remains in many clubs an awful lot of cynicism around some of the things that I do and that we do in the data space, or even do in the video analysis space, or analysis in full stop, video or data. There's some cynicism there. So it was more about culture and education. I think it was about getting people to understand what the potential benefits are. One of the big things is, what's the effort on your part? How's this going to impact you, and what you need to feed into it, and what you can get out the other side. So, there was a lot of minutiae around which products we're going to be using and how to use those products and tools and data sets. But also a big part of it was how are you going to intertwine that into your working practice? How do we change the culture of the club to use this more? And, truth be told, that's a continual journey. That's something that you always look to get better at. And it's very difficult to get moving from a standing start, definitely. But you just need to earn trust, I think. So, over time, we gradually earned more and more trust, and, had input into different decisions. Sometimes the analysis that you do is a huge part of the decision. Sometimes, it's maybe even the driving force. Sometimes it's totally disregarded. And I think it's important not to stand here and say there's a one size fits all here. It's very decision specific, but what you definitely shouldn't be doing is closing your ears to that information you've got available to you to make that decision. An analogy that I like to use is, think of data and analysis as a person in the room. That person has they work 24/7. They have almost an encyclopedic knowledge. They can watch almost every game in the world, and they can do incredibly detailed analysis. Now, if that person existed and was sat in that meeting room with you, would you tell them, I'm not interested in your opinion? Or would you listen to what they had to say, take that on board, and add that into the many voices that are sat having that conversation? And that's how I like to portray data and analysis, like a person, an incredibly smart person that can provide you some really interesting knowledge that will allow you to make better decisions. And that's what we were aiming for. That's what we were trying to get to. And different people within the club moved at different speeds as well. You've got people that have an understanding, have a desire, have maybe in their spare time tried to do some things themselves. And then you have people that this is a totally alien concept, and you need to handle them and manage them and help them go on that journey. at different speeds. So some people might be zooming ahead and reaping huge benefits. Others maybe moving a bit more slowly, and it's a step-by-step thing. But, we tried our best to work at the speed of the people in the organization. And, in time, people, I think, embraced it more and more and more. But what I definitely learned was that you can't come into an organization with them being over here and your mindset and what you want to accomplish be over here, and stand over here and say, come join me. Like, come over to me. What you need to do is go over to them and say, look, let's go on this journey together to get where I think we should be. And that is a lesson that I learned at the club, and something that I've taken forward with me since then as well.
Yeah, definitely. See, you mentioned kind of the T structure in terms of the video analysis. Obviously, there's the kind of the scouting team as well, which tends to be, when clubs bring in data personnel, it tends to be to do with the scouting and the recruitment of players and things like that. So can you talk a little bit around the kind of alignment with the existing scouting team, James, in terms of who was already there and how then data was maybe leaned on a bit more in the recruitment process? Because you can see the kind of type of squad that Sunderland have been building over the last sort of 5, 6, 7 years or whatever, in terms of what it was then to what it is now. We've got some, great young, talented players we've got many players now that could be sold for 10, 50 million plus. And that comes down to good recruitment. And a lot of that, I'm sure, has some link to data. So around that, if you can, James, in terms of the data and aligning with the recruitment team.
Yeah, so Stu Harvey, who's the head of recruitment there, started actually at the same time as me. But we were, I think, two of the first hires under that new ownership. And so we had this great opportunity to kind of build our departments up together. Stu's a sensational head of recruitment. He's incredibly knowledgeable, and he's a traditional scout in many senses, but he's also very open to new ways of working and using data to inform the decision making. And I think what we both, in our very first conversation, what we both knew was that it's not about one or the other. It's about marrying the two together really well. And Stu, like I said, some people had worked on things in their own time, and Stu had done that at his previous club, Blackburn. He developed a way of working. He developed a kind of algorithm that suited him. And so an early part of the work together was trying to turn that into something more rigorous. So how can we do that and expand that across the whole globe? Well, it's slightly exaggerated there. I think we actually did it across about 40 leagues, but how can we expand that in a way that he can see a lot more? And again, the kind of the way that I like to describe this is a funnel. So as an individual, there's only so many hours in the day. There's only so many games you can watch and players you can see. So how can I expand that vision without hiring tons and tons of people? So the top of the hopper was kind of data and analysis. How do we take, millions of players globally and narrow that down into something that the scouting department then can then manage? That's not to say if you went in the top of the hopper and you were sort of, let's say not prioritized as a data a data scouted player, that didn't mean you couldn't continue through the process. It was just trying to narrow down that field of view into a more manageable number. And then from that point, it was the scouting, the recruitment team taking that on, but also still using data and data collection from their more subjective viewpoint and collecting that and then turning that into something that then led them down to the head of department at this point, maybe the head coach is looking at them more, the sporting director is looking at them more, and trim that group down even more so to kind of a long list. And then obviously from a long list, you get down to your short list of guys that you're actually going to really go out and take some action to try and bring into the football club. But every step of the way, more data is getting added into the process and more detail is being delivered on each one of those players. So step one is like giving you kind of general high level stuff. Step two is like, okay, let's layer this up with some really specific stuff about that player, that position. And then step three is like, okay, are they absolutely the ideal player we want in that role? And a big part of that is actually the playing philosophy. How do we want to play as a football club, and how can we align those metrics to that playing philosophy? And I see it as absolutely fundamental to building out a football club. Again, I think it's something Christian did really well to address early on, and the head of coaching, Stu English, developed was a playing philosophy. How do we want to play as a football club? That is our central tenet of our club, and everything will branch off of that. And so the next level was for Stu Harvey to develop recruitment profiles that were in alignment with that playing philosophy, and then for me to develop analyses and maybe even proprietary metrics that align to those recruitment profiles. So everyone is lining up with something that's at the center of the process. And I think that served the club really, really well. Signed some great players. We put some constraints on that as well. We were looking to lower the average age of the squad a bit. Um, we knew that we'd be a bit of a selling club for a while, although I think you can now say that that's changed in literally in the last couple of weeks, where there's sort of bigger money names are starting to come in now. We were trying to be cost effective, not spend a lot of money on a very experienced guy when we can maybe bring in a younger, less experienced guy that we could develop, and that's obviously putting a lot of trust in your coaching team to develop players. So yeah, that was kind of, again, broadly speaking, how that whole thing played out. And I think, if you really look at the record since the new ownership has come in, tons of hits, really, really good signings, very few that you go, that one didn't pan out. And that's not to say that's a way that you should judge recruitment, but I think it's indicative of where the club are now, that philosophy and the processes that were put in place then, and as I understand it, are still broadly followed today, set the club up to go on that upward trajectory that they're on at the moment.
Yeah. Next question I wanted to ask you, James, was around, it was an article I seen on the Training Ground Guru, so shout out to kind of Simon on there. So there's an article, I think it was when you first joined Sunderland, kind of talking a little bit around what you kind of were doing. And there was something you mentioned there which I wanted to jump into a little bit more detail. So the 5 design pillars that you reference in terms of around data. So I think you only alluded to 2 in the article, which were actionable insights and short feedback loops. But just in terms of, firstly, expand on those 2 if you can, and then what are the other kind of pillars that you kind of reference when you're talking around data there?
Yeah, so as I said, when I was in consulting, I worked with all these incredible sporting organisations, and I was starting to learn things that I think were really essential to success. And I wanted to try and find a way to articulate those. I wanted to find a way that I could basically create myself a checklist that I'm like, well, look, if I tick these boxes, then I'm pretty confident that this thing's going to work out. And not only that, but these are things that I want to continually focus on. I might deliver them in some shape or form to begin with, but I want to keep reviewing them, keep looking at them. Am I keeping myself honest by focusing on them? So I've called them my 5 pillars. Maybe that's a bit pretentious, who knows? But there were things that I like to always go back to and make sure I tick the box of. And that's not to say there aren't others, but that could be in there. But these are ones that I felt really served me well. So probably number 1, and that I talk about a lot, is the short feedback loop. I think that is essential. So for me, the time gap between a problem arising or a question being asked and an answer being given or a intervention being made, the bigger that gap, the less impactful and less effective it is. So, the head coach to you comes to you and says, "Oh, what's happening? Why are we getting hammered? With balls into the box or whatever." You're in the middle of the game, and you go, "Okay, Gaffer, I'll get back to you in 3 weeks with an answer on that one." It's not helpful, right? So, you want to set yourself up in a way that you can answer those questions as quickly as possible. And in actual fact, the reality of answering those questions, what it really means is that you can allow for another 2 questions to be asked, and it's allowing you to dig deeper. So I kind of refer to it as layers. So if you can get that primary question done, you can very quickly dig deeper into a secondary question. And that one might take a bit longer to answer. And then you start refining your processes to answer those secondary questions more deeply. And then you can get into your tertiary questions. And now you're really into like the fine detail of what it takes to win and how you make your club better or how you sign better players, whatever the different use case may be. But I think it's essential. And again, to be really boring about it, it goes back to efficiency. Many clubs will solve this problem with people, throwing people at the problem, large numbers of people to solve big problems. My perspective on that is about process, making efficient process. So at the touch of a button, I can get the answer that's needed. And that's something that I will relentlessly pursue to try and shorten that feedback loop. And when that question comes up again, why are we getting destroyed by balls into the box? I go, this is exactly why. Within a few minutes, that's the intention there. I want him to be able to ask me 3 or 4 questions in that conversation rather than asking me 1 and then or 2, or ask those 4 questions, but I can't give him any answers for weeks on end. So that's the first one. The next one is holistic. This, I guess, plays a bit more on the human performance side of things. Maybe in the academy space is a really good place. The recruitment space is a good place to really think about this one. But you're working with people. You're working with individuals, and they are much more than a data point on a page. They have many, many factors and features that feed into them performing well. There's some great analysis out there around tennis players, professional tennis players, and how their performance dips after they have a baby and things like that. We can't forget these factors. We need to try and account for as many of them as we possibly can. Probably the grandfather of data analysis in sport is a guy called Bill James, who I encourage people to go out and research. And that is a mantra that he always preaches. You can't narrow someone down to a single number, nor would I would never encourage people to do that. You've got to take into account the fact that they are a multifaceted person with the mental aspect, the physical aspect, the emotional aspect. There's so many aspects that feature into that. And I think we in sport in generally, and definitely in football, we've maybe been a bit lazy. We've been a bit lazy to try and boil someone down to a number and say they're the best at what they do. And I think that's one to always bear in mind. Like, what am I missing here? What it could be influencing the performance of a player that I'm assessing that I'm not taking account for in my analysis. The next one is then actionable. I talked about this earlier with the communication element of things. You could do incredible research. I've seen some wonderful things being presented at conferences. So fascinating, so interesting. The question I always ask at the end of it is, how do I do something with that? What can I do with that information? That's not always the job of the analyst. That's the job of the collaboration between the analyst and a coach, let's say. But if I can't put that into action, if I can't do anything with that analysis, it's somewhat meaningless. So I always want the analyst to be thinking in the back of their mind, okay, not just what am I doing, but what am I going to do with what I produce at the end of this? I don't know what that might be, but what is the intention of what I can do with that, and how I can action that within a football club. Kind of similar point, but slightly nuanced and different. It's about relevance as well. Like, I see quite a common mistake with young analysts being that they'll do analysis and some really interesting work on something that no one's particularly interested or cares about. Keep it to the stuff that is going to make a tangible difference within your football club. Listen to your customer, listen to your stakeholder within the club, listen to your coach, listen to your sports science person. Listen to what they want to know and try and answer their questions. I think that's the key for an analyst. Don't just do some stuff. I mean, do stuff because it's interesting and it's your passion, but don't then try and force that down the throat of someone that isn't interested in hearing it. And then the final one, I think this is very much more on the sports science side, and it's quite a nuanced point, but I learned this, there's a great story, probably not got enough time to tell you now, but I learned this the hard way in a cycling team, but unobtrusive. I think all too often we forget that the athlete is our most key resource. The player is our most key resource. And quite often we burden them with responsibility to help us, let's put this wearable on you. Let's ask you to fill out this feedback form. Let's ask you to do this, that, and whatever. And maybe too often as well, we don't give them enough insight from all the things they're contributing for us to do. So try not to burden. If you can find a way of gathering that information without them having to give it to you or go out of their way to give it to you, that's optimal. It's why wearables are so great, because you can gather the information you need without having to go, can you take an hour out of your day to help me, fill out some forms or do some tests or whatever. So I want to minimize that burden. And if you absolutely have to burden the athlete or player, how can I get that down to the lowest level? How can I give them some insight on what they've been doing to help me out, and what can I give to them in return? So particularly when I'm doing some kind of more research and development stuff, I'll always try and make sure that those players are getting something back in kind if they're sacrificing their time away from their family to help us learn more about what we're doing. So shouldn't be undervalued there, and ultimately can really kill some projects if you put too much burden on those players, or it could be on the coaches. I could be asking too much of the coaches to give them. How can I reduce that burden for them? So they're my 5 pillars. Again, could be a little bit pretentious, but I do think they'll stand you in good stead if you kind of stick to those and kind of judge the work that you do against them.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's really interesting. I think what I wanted to ask you about next, James, was kind of the consultancies that are existing in football and football analytics. So you don't have to speak specifically on, because I think Sunderland have got some sort of partnership with Serios. I think that was maybe announced when you were there potentially, and obviously that maybe have grown since then. I know you're obviously no longer there, so you're not the best person to speak about that, but just in general, there seems to be a lot of these different data consultancies and kind of companies that crop up, where they're kind of supporting clubs in different ways. What role do you think they play? But also then, what differentiates all of these different consultancies? Is it the type of data that they are offering? Is it their platforms? Is it what they're doing with the data? So there's a lot of questions in there, but just to kind of, for people to better understand what role these consultancies play in elite football.
So yeah, I mean, look, firstly, obviously I came from a consulting background, so I had a great deal of comfort with that, and I knew what I wanted. I think one of the keys with consultants is knowing what you want going into it. I hear a lot of conversations and been involved in a lot of conversations that the customer, the club, are kind of going with a bit of a rough idea of what you want. I think you really need to know what you want to achieve to ask your consultant to deliver that for you. So I'll start with that. I leaned on a couple of consultants during my time at Sunderland. As you mentioned, Serios was one. Sports Forecast was another. But there was a very specific need we were trying to address. So in the case of Serios, they are data management experts. We only had one data person, like I said earlier, Gill, that you referenced, who is an incredible talent. He can do, 3 or 4 jobs was doing 3 or 4 jobs that would be specialized things for individual data practitioners. But there was still too much work for him to manage. So we needed some help to try and get some of these fundamental things done and some of the foundations put in place. And Serios was an organization I found local, Newcastle-based data consultancy. Obviously helped that the owner, the CEO, is a Sunderland fan, so he wasn't going to say no to the opportunity. But we were like, look, we need help setting up databases. We need help setting up schema of how we're going to store our data. We need help being able to access that data readily. We knew what we wanted to do in each one of those areas. We just didn't have the time in the day to write the lines of code to get it done. So those guys really leaned in to help us do that. And as you've mentioned, since myself and Akil have left, they've actually taken a big part of that over. I don't know the full details, but as I understand it, they've taken a big part of that responsibility over to keep that moving forward. So, that was invaluable, really. And then on top of that, and again, a message I keep repeating, they're bringing in expertise from other areas. So Serios, I don't believe they've done any work in sport before working with us. So they're bringing in expertise from what they do in all these other industries and giving us the benefit of it. And that's a huge benefit of consultancies, that they can give you exposure to things that you would never have seen or understood previously. Sometimes they might challenge you and say, we think you should do it this way. And we'll say, okay, yeah, we agree. Or no, we've got our view on how we want to do this thing. Sometimes they'll just go with the flow of exactly what you've prescribed them to do. But they're hugely valuable. Probably one I could talk about a bit more because it's in the press is the relationship with Sports Forecast. So Sports Forecast is actually run by a friend of mine that I used to work with at Deloitte. Again, I say work with. We both worked for Deloitte. We never worked on anything together. We were just aware of each other and our interest in sport. And he started up a company in his spare time. I think he does it part-time still, called Sports Forecast, which was actually a kind of a beat the bookies kind of website. And they built some models around how to find the best odds and things like that, or undervalue odds. I'm not a betting guy, so I don't really fully understand that stuff. But underlying all of that is some quite clever models. And ultimately what they're doing is evaluating or trying to forecast, hence the name, the likelihood of an outcome in a game. Really simply what they're trying to do. And they do that through a really well-established model called an ELO model. ELO models are used in all kinds of places. They started out in chess. And they're now used for more or less every world ranking in sport. I think there's a few exceptions, but the FIFA world rankings, for example, are just an ELO model. And we use that model to then try and forecast what the likelihood of outcomes of games were. To say, okay, well, look, this game's going to be a tough game. This game's going to be a straightforward game. Maybe other teams in the league, we think they'll pick up this many points or drop that many points. And we use that to try and anticipate how we thought the season would play out in actual fact, we did it for 3 seasons that I was there, and I think we got within a point in all 3 seasons. It might have been two. I might be exaggerating there, but very, very close to what panned out. And that's really helpful, right? If you can have some idea of what's going to happen, then you can start to take actions ahead of time of how I can plan for those things. Maybe I've got a really tough run of games coming up, so maybe I rest some of our more senior players in games that we think we're more likely to get a result. Maybe we're traveling a long way from home, and but we've got much more likelihood of picking up points. So let's get a hotel and do an overnighter rather than doing it in a day. All these kind of little decisions that get made at a football club all the time. And then what that then moved into was some research and work that was done on head coach recruitment.
Yeah.
And simply put, what we did is we looked at all the teams that we could get our hands on. I think it was about 10,000 teams over the last 30 years. And we applied this model to it. What did we expect the result to be? And what was the actual outcome? So we expected Sunderland to win, but they lost. So, okay, we're going to give that head coach negative score. This is how again, roughly speaking, how an ELO model works. So we're going to give that coach in charge at the time a negative score. Next week, maybe we're expecting Sunderland to lose badly and they win. Okay, we give them a really positive score. And then we just did that across the course of lots and lots of head coaches' careers. And that's then gave us a league table of, okay, who is having a really positive impact above expectation on the teams that they're coaching. Then we apply a few other criteria. Are they available? Are they within our price range? Are they within the kind of age range we're looking for? Do they have the language skills they need? Things like that. And then you get yourself quite a good little list to go, all right, let's have a look at these guys and have some conversations when the time is needed. And actually, funnily enough, I think this is a really good validation of this. There's lots of guys that have performed incredibly well, but the top of the list in terms of overall performance, we could never obviously afford him at Sunderland, but Nuno at Forest was top of that list, made the biggest impact on the teams that he's managed above what we expected them to do. And I think that is pretty clear and obvious from where they are in the Premier League these days. So it was very, very helpful. And again, not to say it was the be all and end all of head coach recruitment. It was just one factor of the conversation that was being had, and one of the elements we were using to analyze the head coaches we were looking at. But again, a pretty good example, I think, of how a data department should interweave itself within an existing process football club.
Yeah. And was that to bring in Alex Neil, or was that after Alex?
It was involved in the Alex process. Yeah. It was involved. It was involved in all the processes to a greater and lesser extent because of the different scenarios in each one. But reports were produced on them and other head coaches as well. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Perfect. So that's enough on Sunderland. Sorry if everyone's bored of Sunderland, but I enjoyed that conversation, Jay. So let's kind of move. So you left Sunderland, you went to Gemini Sports for a short time. You did a bit more consultancy, and you're now at Genius Sports. Just a little overview, if you can, Jay, what kind of things are you doing there, if you can?
Yeah, so Genius is a quite remarkable company. Most people have probably heard of Second Spectrum, and Second Spectrum is now a Genius company. So that's a big part of the technology. So for those that don't know, essentially camera-based tracking of players within matches. So there's a range of cameras around the stadiums, and they are triangulating the position of players on the pitch so that you can then post-game go, okay, this guy has moved this distance at these speeds, and start to get an understanding of the physical exertion they've made within a game. You could use that for tactical reasons, on my backline, the way I want them, are the wingers spreading as wide as I want them to be, whatever that question might be around formation and positioning as well. And so the Second Spectrum have done that for a long time. And there's recently been an evolution to a new product called Dragon, which is still using many of those underlying technologies that have been in existence for a long time. And what they're doing is something called mesh tracking. So the evolution of tracking, and I'm probably not going to get this quite right, but ultimately is tracking began as like center of mass. So one point on the body, this is where they are. and we're following them around. That then evolved into like skeletal tracking. So you're looking at different joints. We're saying, okay, this is where the shoulder is, this is where the head is, the knees are, etc. And following that kind of skeleton around. And mesh tracking is then the next evolution on from that, where you're looking at a mesh across the whole body. So there's something like 20,000 points on the body that they're tracking in real time. So about 100 hertz, so like 100 frames a second, 20,000 points on the body. And they are doing that across all the players on the pitch. So you know exactly where every point of them are at all times. And the work that I'm doing presently is around semi-automated offside and the application of that technology in semi-automated offside. So incredible tech. I mean, if you were to tell me when I was at Loughborough, you know, sticking golf balls on people, trying to track them, that you could do that with 30 iPhones in a stadium in real time, I would have told you that you were high on something maybe. But yeah, it's moved a long way in a short period of time. And I think that's kind of what's incredible about this space, both the technological and the analytical space, is the rate of development is so rapid. And I think you know, Genius are right at the forefront of that that moved towards more advanced technical innovation.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it leads on. I'd like to ask, you know, people that are working in the space, James, in terms of any kind of predictions or where you may see things might evolve to maybe 5, 10, 15 years from now, like in terms of, you know, obviously everyone's talking about kind of AI at the moment, but in terms of how things might change and develop potentially for the role of the analyst or just clubs in general?
Look, I'm certainly not going to sit here and profess I could have a good educated guess on what will be happening in 5, 10 years. I really hope the industry far out exceeds my expectations for it in that time, and I hope that I'm surprised. But maybe on a shorter time horizon, I think. I mean, look, we've all talked till we're blue in the face around AI. I think it's a bit boring to talk about it, but certainly the integration of that within processes will increase, and has been leveraged by many companies already and clubs as well. I think computer vision, I guess, would broadly fall under the AI banner as well, but I think computer vision is absolutely critical to the future of particular data generation within sport. So being able to do that in an automated fashion and not rely on teams of people. You know, if you take the most extreme example with FIFA, where at tournaments they have one analyst per player per game, 22 analysts for a game is mind-blowing to me. And you know, no club can afford that. Even the Man Cities are not spending money to do that kind of thing. So you know, I think doing that in an automated fashion is critical. And I think from an analyst viewpoint, it's how can I, or at least a video analyst viewpoint, how can I, rather than being the person that collects the data, how can I be the person that exploits the data? How can I make the most out of the data that's given to me, rather than just be the person that types it into the machine to log it? I think there's a really important mind shift that needs to go on with analysts, and broadly has done across the leagues. But you know, I think you're possibly being a bit foolhardy if you think that you're going to make a career out of just coding games for an awful lot longer, because the technology is just moving ahead, whether you like it or not, and start thinking about those things in those terms. And then the final one for me is probably around more predictive analytics. I think it's underutilized right now. I talked about the example with Sports Forecast about us trying to forecast the results. And I think we should be doing more in that space. We should be looking to forecast more of what we think is going to happen, so that we can start to then make movements and change processes or change interventions ahead of time, rather than being purely reactionary and, oh, this thing's happened, you know, maybe it's this injury's happened and we've got to deal with it. Like, what's the likelihood of these things occurring? That's not to say, and I think there's a big misconception in this space, and it's why I use the term forecast rather than prediction. That's not to say that these predictions are going to be 100%. I think a big misunderstanding in this space is thinking that a prediction has to happen. It doesn't. It's about understanding the likelihood of something happening, and then assessing the risks that are associated with that thing, or the opportunities that are associated with that thing. But definitely don't sit there and think, oh, it's going to predict the future and it needs to get it right every time. I mean, to be honest, if that was true, I'd be down the bookies. I wouldn't be working, because I'd be making a fortune on all the results that I knew were going to happen ahead of time. So, even the best models for forecasting are working around 65-70%. So you're looking at a third of the time that thing that you think is likely to happen not happening.
Yeah.
But the key to remember with all of it is expand it, extrapolate it out over a period of time. If you and a machine went head to head on one particular game, maybe Sunderland's next game, I don't know who they're playing, you might well beat the machine. But if you do that over the course of a season, and all the games in a season, and then potentially all the other teams in the league as well that are going to affect your league position, the machine's going to win. I can promise you that the machine is going to win every time. So I think the future prediction is more future predictions. I think is where I'm gonna place my stall. But hopefully, like I say, it far exceeds my expectation, and this space is developing exponentially.
Nice. Just because you mentioned, James, I will say, for anyone interested in the FIFA reference you said in terms of one analyst per player, excuse me, I will link that down below. I've had a couple of FIFA analysts on here before, and that was really interesting to see how that is actually done and managed with the team of so many analysts for one particular match. So what I want to ask you a little bit about, James, is, and you've touched upon a lot of this as we've gone through the conversation, but just kind of advice for people that want to forge a career in sports analysis. So you kind of describe yourself as a bit of a generalist in terms of not specialising in one particular thing. What would you say? Would you encourage people to be more generalist or more specialist? And does that depend on where you are in your career? And just around that, please.
Yeah, I don't think there's a one way or another here. I think it depends on your passions, your desires. I think I realized early on, and maybe it's because I spent those 5 years in publishing, I kind of missed the boat on the opportunity to be a specialist analyst. Maybe that's the reason why. But, weigh up what you want to do, and then take the steps towards it that you think are going to make that thing happen. So, maybe it's for the next 5 years I'm a specialist video analyst, but the next 5 years I want to be, a specialist something else, or maybe work my way more towards a generalist and understand more about recruitment or more about academy. But try and plot that path out for you. It's something I always encourage my team to do. That would be the kind of the nature of the like monthly conversations we'd have on career progression, was like, have some idea of what the next sort of year, 3, 5, 10, what you want them to look like. It doesn't have to be in detail. It doesn't have to be something you have to necessarily even meet, but have some kind of path plotted out in front of you, because what you'll quickly find is that time will whiz by. That year will disappear. And if you don't keep yourself honest, chances are you probably won't get to where you want to be. So continually kind of reflect on what you want to accomplish and aim towards it. So the thing I'll say about being a generalist as well is don't close your eyes and ears to any learning. Yes, I want to be a specialist. That doesn't mean you can't learn something from something that might appear on the surface, at least, to be completely unrelated. I've got some kind of weird and wonderful stories from my career of things that you would never think in a million years would benefit me in sport, but have done. And so make sure you keep your ears open to that. And you might not want to be a generalist in the long term, but make sure that you're not becoming too blinkered. And it's very easy within football, I think, to get an entry-level role, stay with a club, work your way up. And all you know is that one club and that one way of working, that one way of looking at things. And at a certain point, you'll get in your career and you'll go, well, actually, I need to know how the others operate. If I'm going to compete with them, I need to know what the others are doing. Otherwise, I can't be better than them. Or if I'm going to continually look to improve and have that growth mindset, I need to be learning from people that can tell me things that I don't know. So I think just being really open and honest about what you don't know and where you can be better. I said it earlier, it doesn't matter if you're the best, you can still be better. So I think really embracing that mindset. And if we're talking specifically about data as well, I think the same applies to video, but definitely in the data space, embrace the community. There's a reason that data and analysis has grown at a rapid rate. It's because it's actually a very open community, especially for sport and especially for football. There's an awful lot of, I'm going to keep my secrets in house, but that community shares an awful lot. There's a lot to learn from people, and they're quite open. And don't be shy to connect with people. There are things that we wanted to do at Sunderland that we kind of heard about. We had some ideas about. We weren't specialists in, and we'd even get on Twitter and tweet people that were the specialists in that area and say, "Look, can we get an hour of your time? Can you come talk to our department for half an hour? And where can we learn and grow?" So yeah, really embrace the community, embrace the sharing mindset, embrace the growth mindset, and have a really good idea or some semblance of an idea of where you want to get to in the longer term.
Yeah, perfect. No, that's good advice. So one other thing on my list to kind of mention to you, James, was I can see you've kind of, I don't know if it's still ongoing or you've finished it, was this you sports directorship master's degree, is it master's degree? So is that finished, or are you still doing that?
Final module now, actually. So I'm
yours,
just kicking off my thesis, my final project that will go on till September. So, I think hopefully I'm practicing what I preach here, that this was my ambition. So from being in publishing, I wanted to be in sport. That was my short-term target. Being in sport, I wanted to learn as much as I could about different sports. Then from that, I wanted to apply that within an individual club. And when I got into that club, my focus was on Sunderland, but I'm also thinking, what's my next step onwards from there? And that was sporting directorship. And, I took the opportunity, I said it in the interview process, I want to learn as much as I can from Christian as a sporting director, how he operates, where I align, where I disagree, formulate a view on how I want to be as a sporting director. And then obviously doing this master's is then trying to fill in those gaps. What do I need to be better at? Am I good at the things that I think I'm good at? Will the approach that I want to take be successful or have a likelihood of success? So it's been a long term. It's been on like my 10-year radar for a long time. But obviously, as that you get closer into that 10 years, I was like, okay, now's the time I really want to take action and push myself closer to the ultimate objective for me. So, all the things we've really talked about, I'm trying to validate and learn more about on this course. How do you change the culture of a club? How do you operate as a leader rather than kind of middle management? How do you look to continually learn and grow and better your football club? And then how do you embrace all aspects of the football club and weave it all together into one kind of cohesive performance unit? So it's something that I've wanted to do a long time, and learn a hell of a lot. Been really fortunate to have a lot of great sporting directors talk on the course as well, which is a unprecedented experience that you don't often get. And it's been sensational. So yeah, really looking forward to getting my teeth into my final project. I wish I could tell you what it was about, but because of ethics and all that good stuff in your master's degrees, I need to keep it to myself for now. But yeah, it's something I've wanted to do for a long time, and really happy to have finally, keeping myself honest, getting to that goal that I've set for myself. So obviously getting through that course, and then not longer that after that, the target will be find a role as a sporting director with a club that aligns to my view of the world. So yeah, really fun project, really great cohort of other students on it as well, who I've learned a hell of a lot from. So yeah, it's something that I'm really passionate about and really enjoying.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely an interesting role. And I think there's quite a few other analysts that it does seem like a natural progression. If you want to be involved in the football, you kind of, from an analyst, whether it's like some sporting directors are old heads of recruitment, old scouts, but then, analyst is a pathway that people are kind of going across. So one thing I do like to ask everyone, James, is whether you're a reader, do you have time to read any books that you would recommend? It doesn't have to be sports; it can be totally off the random completely. But anything that you've read that you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, definitely. So it's funny you should bring up this question, because I had an increasingly growing pile on my bedside table of books, and some of them that I will embarrassingly admit had been there for maybe 5-6 years. And recently I kind of, a bit of a New Year's resolution kind of thing. So, okay, I need to get my teeth into some of these and make this pile smaller. And there's some great ones I've read quite recently. I'd be absolutely remiss if I didn't mention Ian Graham's book, How to Win the Premier League.
Mhm.
Love it. Absolutely love it. I think actually someone that's worked in publishing may be uniquely qualified
Yeah.
to talk about how good a book it is, but it's great. And straight after reading it, I've been lucky enough to know Ian a little bit. Text him and said, "Look, I want the companion book now. I want the deep dive. I want to get under the skin of all of these projects that you tell these stories about." So yeah, really, really great read, and he's created a great narrative, and it's not a dry analytical book as you might expect. He's told some really great stories and woven data into them, which is great. The book that I'm just wrapping up at the moment, I'm actively enjoying. Ian references it. This is actually the book that's been on my bedside table for 5-6 years. Was The Signal and the Noise by Nate Silver. He's kind of an American analyst. He's started in politics, applied that same kind of analytical mindset to sport. If I'm remembering this right, I think his website's 538. But really well written book again, really interesting stories and examples. And then kind of more more general, less data specific books, but I love anything by Michael Lewis. If people don't know who Michael Lewis is, he's the author of Moneyball. Funnily enough, Moneyball wasn't his first book I started on, but I don't think the guy can write a bad book. I honestly think he's probably the best author of like this generation. He's incredible. But yeah, he's got great books. So yeah, you'll probably know most of his books from films. So like The Big Short, The Blind Side, Moneyball. The thing I'll say is I'll really encourage you, don't just watch the film. The film does not do these books service. I mean, they're great films. I love them, but you get so much more detail in the book. So if you've watched Moneyball and this is an area that you're interested in working in, read the book. Definitely read the book, and actually go one level further. And I only just discovered this, which is embarrassing to admit, but he's got quite an extensive podcast series as well, called Against the Rules, which I'm really enjoying on my drives into work at the minute. So again, direct anyone towards those, because I think the podcasts are superb and just as well produced as he writes his books.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll link those below. I love I've never read The Big Short, but I've seen the film. I love it's a great film. So yeah, I'll definitely check out the book as well. So yeah, I'll link those below. I'll link a couple of other episodes that we've kind of referenced throughout as well. But other than that, James, I want to say firstly, thanks a lot for your time. You did warn me that you can talk a lot, so we've gone over an hour, about an hour and a half now. So I appreciate if anyone is still listening, then that's perfect. So yeah, other than that, just thanks again. Good luck in the sports directorship and everything. And I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Absolute pleasure.